Disintegration is unlike any other game on the market, which isn't necessarily a good thing. Whilst it lays a solid foundation for its gameplay, its full potential is never quite reached, and its best component, the multiplayer, at the time of review is nowhere to be found. Nevertheless, there's certainly some things to really admire about this debut game from the small team of 31 developers at V1 Interactive. Disintegration is a first-person shooter and real-time strategy game rolled into one. It has the player operate a grav cycle, a hovercraft that lets you move around the world on 3 axes. The player is equipped with weaponry on the vehicle, but also has a squad they can command in real time to interact with objects and provide additional firepower. In the game's campaign, this grav cycle operator is Roma Shoal, a once human that has integrated, the procedure of having your mind transplanted into a robot body. In a previous life, he was a famous grav cycle pilot and a host of a TV show revolving around the vehicles. The machines were eventually outlawed, however, so Roma began to smuggle them, which led to his arrest and imprisonment on a jail in the sky known as Iron Cloud. At the start of the game, he and a group of integrated escape the clutches of the Rayon, integrated that have shed the remnants of their humanity and preach assimilation. They are discovered by Wagoner, a natural, someone that hasn't undergone integration. He leads a team of outlaws that Roma and the other escapees join to face off against the Rayon and their leader, Black Shuck. There are a lot of different terms and lore that the game throws at you as it unfolds. It is delivered thick and fast during cutscenes and in-game character dialogue, but isn't supported by any collectibles that might flesh out and more clearly define some of these ideas. Fortunately, characters are unique enough and the dialogue is well written. On the surface, it is interesting stuff, but the game never allows you to dig into it deeper, the same of which can be said about the gameplay. When moving through the world, you are exclusively locked to your grav cycle, except for between missions when you are either stationed at the team's home base or an established outpost, both of which operate as extremely barren backdrops to have a brief engagement with other characters or pick up side objectives to complete in a level.
Homer. Wanna have some fun? See you later.
What's great about the game is the grav cycle is really fun to operate, and it's clear that this is the gameplay that the developers poured most of their time and attention into. Moving across the 3 axes is smooth, with a satisfying boost button allowing you to outmaneuver enemies. Just be careful that you don't run off an edge, as the grav cycle merely hovers and does not fly. Unfortunately, the weakest aspect of the vehicle is the shooting. Having the added dimensions of moving up and down means that your aim as a player requires more precision than your regular FPS, so it's disappointing that the simple act of aiming isn't as smooth as maneuvering the grav cycle. On top of that, the hovercraft is outfitted with some pretty bland weaponry. As you progress through the campaign, you discover and can operate different grav cycles, all of which are outfitted with your classic assault rifles, shotguns, etc. Your secondary tool is usually reserved for a method of healing you or your team, which is vital, but it means that shooting variety in a level is limited and can get old quick. As previously mentioned, you are not the only character in a level, with the player given up to 4 ground units to manage. In the campaign, these units are comprised of other characters in the game, each of which can interact with objects in the level such as medical stations. Their other function serves as additional firepower against the Rayon, with each character given a special ability such as a mortar strike or a time-slowing energy dome. These abilities are quick and easy to execute as they are each mapped to a direction on the D-pad. Using each of your unit's abilities in conjunction with one another as well as dealing your own damage is the heart of the gameplay. Some of the time, it all comes together rather nicely, and certainly has its exhilarating moments. Side objectives can also incentivize you to use your unit's abilities in a certain combination to get a little XP boost, which in conjunction with integration chips can be used to buff Roma and his squad. Whilst your attacks might interact with those of your ground units, Roma at no point communicates verbally with his team during the game. At Chatty Cathy during cutscenes, Roma's personality vanishes during gameplay, which is a shame, as the ground units are constantly interacting with one another. It feels odd to have Roma be a part of the crew in the cutscenes, and then act as a silent guardian during gameplay. Having him provide some of the dialogue might also help connect the player with the story more, and might alleviate some of my issues in that regard.
Alright, which way?
Romer should choose. If there's a 50-50 chance of taking the wrong path, I'll pick it every time.
Enemies you face off against are the aforementioned Rayon. There are a variety of different types, such as hulking rhinos or snipers that can deal damage from afar. Too often, however, their strategy is to simply overwhelm you with numbers, most of their forces haphazardly charging headfirst into conflict, making it easy to deplete them if it weren't for the sheer volume. It doesn't help that most missions simply require you to move through a map and destroy all the enemies or interact with an object. There is a level toward the start of the game that adds a twist on the design by requiring you to take shelter from an intermittent EMP blast as you make your way to destroying the device that is causing it. The campaign itself can be completed in around 10 hours, so I would have loved to have seen more of this variety applied to more of the levels, but that gameplay diversity is sadly few and far between. One of my favorite things about the game is the design. The look of the integrated and Rayon, the world they inhabit, and most importantly, the grav cycles all have a fantastic look. The grav cycle takes up a large portion of the player's field of view, so it's great that up close, the little details look wonderful. That being said, visual fidelity is lost in a lot of the environments, which isn't noticeable during frantic encounters, but there are times when the game simply has you traversing from one location to another. It's in these moments that that lack of fidelity can really stick out in contrast with the detail of the grav cycle. In addition, I would have loved to have seen better performance on my Xbox One X, or perhaps an option to toggle to a lower resolution and a higher frame rate. 30 frames per second is not the ideal way to play a game like this, which is all about speed and precision. There were moments too when an overwhelming amount of particles brought that frame rate to a crawl. Fortunately, I only experienced a handful of these dips. The visuals, however, benefit greatly from the environmental physics, which allow you to tear up your surroundings as much as the enemies that occupy them. Before receiving this review copy of Disintegration, I had already played the game's multiplayer at behind closed doors demos and during its beta earlier this year. I thoroughly enjoyed that gameplay far more than I've been enjoying the campaign. It adds a lot of variety that I've been missing, giving you the ability to control one of 9 distinct teams and grav cycles. The uncertainty of a player-controlled enemy also added more thoughtful gameplay over the predictable AI encountered in the campaign. Tragically, however, I have been unable to connect or matchmake across its 3 multiplayer modes during review. Obviously, this will be remedied when the game goes on sale, and I plan on reviewing the multiplayer separately once I've actually been able to spend some time with it. But I do think a lot of players will find the bulk of the game's value in that element over its campaign. That value is what I have trouble with when putting my feelings of Disintegration into consideration. In a world where we have free-to-play games such as Apex Legends or Warzone, it's hard to not look at Disintegration as a game that should have followed that format. Forgo the campaign, put all that time and effort into crafting the multiplayer, and release it for free with cosmetic microtransactions to bring in the money. That's a game I can see exploding with a similar popularity to the aforementioned titles, but I fear Disintegration might have some trouble trying to sell a $50 campaign to access the bread and butter multiplayer experience. There's a lot of awesome groundwork here to be built upon. My hope is that V1 Interactive is able to do so as that multiplayer evolves and have Disintegration reach its full potential.
Right away!
Right away.
Will do.